Alrighty. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. My name is Bridget LeCompte. I am one of the conference organizers alongside my fabulous colleagues. We have Patty Labrador from ODU and Lori Ray and Amy McLemore from North Carolina DPI and UNC Chapel Hill, and then Deb Rose. I will be the facilitator for today's session. Fingers crossed. Hopefully everything will go smoothly with our technology. Just a few housekeeping items to begin with. Just please stay muted unless you are instructed otherwise. We are also recording this session so that we can post it later on the website. Feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions or make comments. The evaluation link for CEUs will be posted at the end of the session. You should also see closed captioning running at the bottom of the screen. If you cannot see it, there's this little WebEx monster looking guy, and you can click on CC and see those closed captions. We are just about halfway through the month of our Reimagine conference, and we hope you are enjoying the wide variety of sessions that are available. We encourage you to keep exploring the website and watch as many great sessions as you can until everything closes at the end of the month. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our wonderful speaker, Alyssa Wern. Alyssa is an OT and a RESNA certified AT professional. She is currently the local assistive technology specialist for Alachua, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, County Schools, where she coordinates AT services for the district and serves as the lead OT. In her spare work time, she has a private practice named AT and OT Consulting and Coaching, where she supports students and families primarily through teletherapy evaluations, consultations, and interventions. We are grateful that you are here, Alyssa, and with that, I will pass the mic over to you.
And I will click the 14 buttons that it involves to get a presentation shared. All right, and just let me know when you do see the shared slides.
We can see them now.
Perfect. Okay, so as she said, my name is Alyssa Wern. This presentation is really about what is the role of OTs and physical therapists in AAC. And some people may be surprised to hear that there is a role for our two group of professionals. So in order to get to the slides, there is both a bit.ly link on the bottom left of the screen as well as the QR code on the bottom right. And if you'll do me a favor, Bridget, just kind of drop that bit.ly in the chat box every once in a while, that would be very helpful. And so we're going to think a little outside the box. We're going to talk about AAC from the perspective, not from the speech language pathologists, but from our perspective as OTs and PTs. And in terms of, I'm trying to stall so people could grab that QR code if they want. But if you want to have access to the slides, we'll make sure that we get the bit.ly link. I believe it's already on the website. If it's not, we'll make sure we also get that up there. And then I'm going to show you another way that you're also going to have access to these resources. Great. Thank you, Bridget, for putting that in there. So she did a great job doing my bio. You don't need to hear this all over again. I am in Gainesville, Florida, where it is currently torrentially raining. I think we've gotten about 5 inches in the last hour and a half. So I'm hoping that my internet decides to cooperate for the next little bit. And I do have a 4-legged friend floating around here. And in case my dog decides she wants to bark, I'm just going to tell you in advance that's what that is. Just to be very open and transparent, my disclosures, I do get a full-time salary from the Alachua County Public Schools. I've presented at many conferences, some of which I've received an honorarium, and some of them I have done because I'm passionate about this topic. I have that private practice. I volunteer for an organization called AT Makers. Sometimes I get app codes or pre-release software in exchange for feedback, and I do provide services as a consultant to Verge Learning and Exceptional Ed, which are kind of one joined company. For which I'm paid, but we're not really going to talk about those products today. I just want to be transparent. What we are going to talk about is about that role of AAC. This is a one-stop shop of all the resources that we're going to talk about today. So this Wakelet link will take you to a kind of visual representation of all of the links and the resources that we discuss. The best way to describe a wakelet is it's as if Padlet and Pinterest had a baby. So you get the like organizational structure of Padlet and you get the visual structure of Pinterest. So when you open that up, basically you get a resource that this wakelet can be shared with anybody and everybody. And it basically has right now 63 items. I keep adding to it, and it's all related to either OT's role or PT's role, all about AAC. So again, don't panic about what link was that, where do I go? All of the links are in there, and I usually do a spot check after the presentation in case I added something and it didn't get in the wakelet. I'll make sure it does. So, very brief note about terminology. I try to use AT when I talk about assistive technology, just because it's shorter. I try to refer to OTPs in meaning both our OTRs and our CODAs because both play a very critical role in implementing AT. I try to use PT professionals, and that includes both our PTAs, our physical therapy assistants, as well as our PTs. I am trying really hard to be neutral about state specific technology. If something flies out of my mouth that is very Florida specific, drop a note in the chat box and say what the heck is what the heck is that acronym? Yeah, I can actually put the full Wakelet link in. Hang on just a second. Oh,
got you
somebody
in
beat
there.
me to it. Awesome. So just if I say something and it doesn't make sense, please ask. I put in some fact sheets and information about what we know OT and PT to be, but chances are if you are here, you are likely an OT or a PT. I do this because I want to set the stage that communication is an occupation that they need to participate in. And if somebody then questions you, why are you working in AAC? Why are you helping with this kid's device? It's because that's part of what AOTA says we're supposed to be supporting, right? We know it's not about finding people's jobs. We really know it's about helping them to do whatever job and life they want to do independently. And the same is true for our PT professional friends, right? So this is a fact sheet from the PTA Association. It's the pediatric one to talk about what is our role in school-based practice. And when you look in that actual fact sheet, it says that PT providers help to determine needs for appropriate assistive technology, accommodations, and strategies. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying that our PTs are supposed to be recommending Lamp Words for Life over TD Snap as an AAC device. That's not what I'm saying at all, but they do bring very, very important knowledge to the table about what would help that student be successful using an AAC device. We spend most of our day, when I think about what did I do today, I spend most of my day not in my comfort zone and borderline in the fear zone. I think our role is really in the learning and growth zone. In what we do every day with our students is work to help them be able to deal with a challenge, to be able to set a goal and achieve it, to be able to gain the skills they need to be a student. And that doesn't work if we stay in what we're comfortable with. So I understand when I say, and I start with the premise that OTPs and PT professionals should be supporting AAC and working with it, that might be uncomfortable for some people. But I want to encourage you to just hopefully approach this time with an open mind and see where are the spaces and places where it does make sense for us to be supporting our students. So this is another fact sheet from AOTA. I'm not going to read it to you or belabor the point, but I think it's important to know that our professional organization is saying we have a role in technology, and these are all the things that we are supposed to be helping to support. And that includes positioning and modification of speech and communication devices to facilitate social participation, right? So it's within our, specialized knowledge and skills statements that that's a piece of our picture. And I want again to kind of give you a little bit of fuel if somebody does come back and say, "Hey, whoa, it's on our professional documents," and there is a similar document for PT that talks specifically about adaptive equipment, of which could be positioning equipment for an AAC device. The big picture goal, the whole reason why we would want to support our students in AAC is so that they become more independent. They have access to their curriculum and their environment, their world. They learn, what is this advocacy thing? Like, how do I speak up for myself? How do I self advocate for the things that I need or I don't want? And really, all three of those things need a very active, appropriate communication system to be able to be independent, accessing their world and advocating for themselves. So I love this graphic, and the source is on the bottom right because I think it speaks to, yes, we know we need to get there, but what are those sets of components and skills that are really important to learn tasks? And it could be any task. I think it helps to represent how complex learning these tasks can be. And I know we're not talking about handwriting today, but that's the example I kind of pop out to is, you know, handwriting is not just, I need to know how to make the letters, right? It could involve more than half, if not more, of the things in this pyramid of learning. And I think it's important that we think, oh, you know what? I may not be the auditory language skills expert in the room, but I sure as heck know a lot about postural stability and motor planning and our sensory systems and what they can bring to the table in terms of supporting a student. So I think in terms of framing the conversation within our IEP teams, I think it's important for us to be better about selling ourselves, to be able to tell people, hey, this is why we I guess pun intended, deserve a voice at the table for AAC for our students. A couple of other frameworks that I think it's important that we kind of digest and know are a piece of a picture for us is the PEO model, really looking at those persons, those students in our world, the environment they're working in, and what jobs we're asking of them, and what factors might be hindering them, right? It may be that we need to change some environmental factors that somebody else hasn't noticed, but because we're looking at it through a certain framework, we're thinking, oh, wait, let's consider this factor and whether we change it or we adapt it. The HAT model is another one that comes more from the angle of assistive technology, but it's something I certainly remember learning in my bachelor's OT program, which reveals how old I am. Um, but this HAT model, right? Everything is based in context, and for our complex communicators or part-time AAC users, we need to really be balancing who they are, what we want them to do, and then the tools that we want them to do it with. And all of it comes back to task analysis. I know we did so many activity analysis and task analysis as OTs coming through school, but it is an essential skill for us to be able to really figure out what are all those complex kind of dynamics that we need to take into consideration as we're working with our students and their teams, right? So the whole goal of task analysis or activity analysis is that we're breaking down a huge skill into smaller or easier steps. We're figuring out what pieces of that are really difficult for our students and then deciding, are we accommodating it? Are we teaching a different way to do it through a compensatory measure? Or are we changing up the task a little bit? And the whole goal is that we're able to over time reduce the support that a student needs so that we can reach one of those goals I talked about of independence. So my proposal for us to kind of talk through tonight is I really feel like OTPs and PT professionals can use our skills to assist with positioning and access, interventions, and environmental control IADLs. And we love our acronyms in the world of special education, so I said, why not? Let's make an acronym. I think our role and justifying our role then turns into easy as pie. which I'm on East Coast time and have not yet had dinner, so now I want a piece of pie. We're going to dive into positioning and access. This is the one that I think when people think about AAC, they think, oh, well, that kind of makes sense that this would be an area that we absolutely could be supporting our AAC users. So when we think about positioning for any success, but particularly our AAC device access, the old school thinking was we have to make sure that we are at 90, 90, 90, that, our ankles are at 90, our hips are at 90, our knees are at 90. And the more current kind of research and evidence-based and practice-based, thinking is that we want to be in an active learning position, right? So it may not be that 90 90 90, and I can almost guarantee you that 90 90 90 isn't. If you've ever tried to sit in a 90 90 90 and do a task at a computer, it becomes difficult. Our optimal posture really is something a little bit more in active learning, in a little bit more kind of push together, a little bit more almost as if you're getting ready to like push yourself up out of a seat, because it allows you to engage in what's happening, right? The task that we're asking you to do. If your job is just to maintain your posture, well, sure, 90 90 90 works for you. But if we want them to do something with that, in this case, communicate, we absolutely want them to be actively learning. So, what that really means in text form is that, we are getting ready to rise up out of our seat, which means that our trunk is a little bit more forward leaning than a typical 90 90 90 would put our hips at, right? And while we want our feet on the floor, absolutely, we know that our hips and our knees and our elbows might be slightly more than 90 90 90, which allows us to engage with, in this case, the AAC device. And if you're talking about a student who is using eye gaze or who has a complex body, obviously we want their trunk supported and their active learning may look a little bit different. So Karen Kangas, who's done a lot of work in this area, says that seating for anyone can't be a singular posture, and any singular posture without mobility in that system can't help them to be independent in a task, right? We don't hopefully sit all day, every day in one place doing a task, right? It's not good for many reasons, and it's definitely not good for the students that we work with. So we know that it's really important that we provide them stability in the places that help them to be able to be mobile. So I remember ingrained in me from OT school and practice is giving them proximal stability, which enables that distal mobility. And this is incredibly true for our kids who need to use devices. We need to make sure that they're hips and their neck and their knees are providing stability so that they can reach out their hand and touch a communication device with their fingers, right? Otherwise, our big muscles are not doing their job to help support those little muscles that need to be actively engaged with AAC. So this is kind of a flashback if you did take some neuroanatomy or anatomy courses in college. If you didn't, it's not so much important that you know the name of every little position as that you know that for lots of reasons these are not really great functional positions, but I spend time in classrooms every day and I see these all the time. And I think that we need to be good about being willing to speak up in a classroom and say, hey, you know what? Let me adjust your, student A's position a little bit because I see they're having a hard time with whatever the task is, AAC or otherwise. And I think I have an idea why, right? If we've got a huge pelvic rotation going on, if we've got, a pelvic tilt happening, it's a lot harder to get your distal mobility, your action, hands and fingers engaged. Now, obviously, if there's a skeletal deformity and they have a complex body, we need to take that into consideration. But I think the more important thing here is to know that, there is a distinct effect of positioning on AAC use. So the hyperlinked document is a one-page kind of handout that goes through What are some kind of talking points on why position is important for our AAC users? And that making sure that from a health perspective, we're also protecting their skin and making sure that if there's any potential skin breakdown, we're addressing that. But I think it's also important that we're making sure that we're preventing the long-term effects of bad positioning, because if they're in a spot where they're not getting great positioning supports in 10, 20, 30 years, their access to an AAC device might significantly be affected if we're not protecting and helping to support their postures now. Um, I think obviously if we're talking about kids that have super complex needs, getting, a seating specialist in, making sure that you're collaborating with outside providers is important. But I think the hugest isn't even a word. The largest thing is making sure that, like, if you see something off and it just doesn't look right, to say something to somebody. If that somebody isn't you, if you're an OT and seating's just not your jam, it's not where you spend a lot of your time and expertise, make sure you go to the PT that's assigned to that student and is like, I saw something different with Johnny and it's not how he's normally positioned. And then he was having a really hard time doing my activity. Like, can you take a look at him next time you're there? And then again, the reminder that we don't want to be in one seating position all day, every day. Nobody would want to do that, I hope. So when we look at how do we provide access to an AAC device, I think we also need to use our very creative OT-PT hats, because that's not just how do we provide access when they're sitting at a table and everything is perfectly supported. So this is an example of a pre-K classroom where I had a student at that time using eye gaze, and we had to get really creative in, okay, it's circle time. How do we make sure that she's actively able to answer our questions and report to us when her method of access is eye gaze? And so I wouldn't have used a tumble form feeder seat for her for other reasons, for other activities, but for this specific activity, sitting on the floor, it is the best option for her to be able to access that device. Again, this is using a floor mount and eye gaze. And it also might mean that that position is not directly in front of that student's eyes. A lot of times there's that misnomer that, if we want it to pick up both their eyes or we want them to be able to access it, that it needs to be right in front of them at midline. Well, that might not be that student's best route of access. Maybe their left hand is stronger and we need to place it off to the left side. Or if they're an eye gaze user, that for the most part they're relying on their right eye, we need to place it right of center. And these are things, to be honest with you, I know that speech therapists don't necessarily always take into consideration, because it's just not, when you think about positioning, they're not thinking about the bigger body picture always. They're thinking about the language system, which is good. Once we know all of that and we know that their position is secure and established, we then need to kind of think about, all right, what do we want them to do in this position? We've got them in a great active learning position where we know that their core is supported and they can either use eye gaze or their hands. How do we best enable that so that they can participate and access their device? Does it mean that, given that support, they can use an index finger? Or do they need hand supports to be able to direct select? Do they need to go to switches? Do we need styluses? So we've got to think through, once we know that position is the good and right position for them for this activity and this time, we then need to think about how are they accessing a device. And sometimes it's not by making a gigantic change. Okay. So this is my friend on the left. This is from a long time ago, because this young lady is now in her mid-20s. And we were really working on doing a speech language assessment. This is a speech language therapist over here.
Remember, you got to stay there for a second.
And what we were working on was doing the assessment. While I was there, I thought, you know what? I so much struggling in trying to be able to access and use it. The difference between what we see on the left when she is using her hand in the position she wanted to sit in. She was a high schooler then. Um, and her accuracy and positioning with just changing nothing about her positioning, but
Amber, you
just
got to stay
changing
there for a
what we were
second.
placing in her hand makes a difference. Again, this was the stylus that happened to come with the device at that time, but there are tons of other ways that we can provide that access. And her ability to participate and get an accurate, correct, non-miss-hit sentence out increased drastically, including that stylus. There are tons of styli, I'm not really sure what the plural is, out there. And again, we need to match what are our students' characteristics and what do we feel like they need. I have students who have relatively typical bodies, but they just don't, their index finger is not working. They don't have a finger that they can isolate. This allows us to give them an isolated pointer to select their device. There are crayon styluses that look like a big, big crayon. It's where I like to start with some of my younger kids. The Cataguse Faraday stylus is a stylus I used with a young adult client of mine who really liked it because it was very like sleek and minimalized. All of these resources take you to adaptive styluses, some of which were meant for apps and iPads, but could certainly be used in other places. And the other thing I just want to call your attention to is that if none of those off the shelf things you could buy styluses work, you can 3D print a stylus or a universal cuff. And that allows you to make it any way you want. If you have a student who purple and white, I'm trying to think of maybe that's Minnesota Vikings colors. I was trying to think of a school team. Whatever's going to motivate them to be want more willing to use a stylus and engage with it. We can make it customizable not only for the colors, but customizable to how their hand structure is set up. There are also tons of key guards, touch guards, and key guides. And there are actually 3 different kind of ways we would define these things. Key guards are the traditional thing that a lot of people would try if a student is really having a hard time getting their finger to isolate and select something with a lot of other errors, right? So it usually has those rectangular opens like you see on the bottom image. And there's kind of it's a pretty thick little key guard so that your finger can kind of slide down in the pocket of it, and it doesn't allow you to kind of hit another one at the same time by accident. And most of them are able to be kind of flipped up out of the way so that you can go in and change things and program things and add things without disrupting it. There are also touch guides. These touch guides tend to have oval, but I've seen some that don't. And the whole goal for a touch guide is to basically help a student who needs a little bit of extra definition on where things are, but they don't need the depth of it. So maybe they're using their finger, but maybe they're using a stylus or a head stick or an arm pointer, and if they use that, sometimes it can get stuck down in the thickness of the key guard. And most of the time, although I have seen some that you can remove easily for programming, but it's really just about defining a little bit of difference between where they would select for each one. Okay. The last version is something called a key guide, right? I have only seen a key guide on the Print-Keyramic devices and only specifically for a setup that has 84 little pictures, right? The difference between the key guide is that each of the little key areas kind of have a little tactile feel to them. They're used a lot with our students who have vision impairments who need both the discrimination of a hole where they're supposed to select, but they also need a little bit of tactile feel to know where some of those rows are. So they have some tactile markers that divide every section of 2 rows. They're another option, again, to support access. If none of those things are available, are options, are things that you have access to right there and then, you can always buy them, You can always 3D print them. And I will almost guarantee that if you are in a school district or an area that has an active robotics team, that there is a 3D printer someplace within your school system. A lot of our public libraries have 3D printers now. It is amazing because I don't feel bad if I 3D print a key guard and it doesn't work, or it gets broken, or I have to adjust it. It probably cost me less than $2 to print one, and I can go back and make another one if that doesn't work. So another resource, there are the Volkswitch people have set up amazing tutorials on how to do specific apps on the iPad, how to make that key guard, as well as devices. And they have a whole bunch of YouTube videos, as well as this one is really informative. Like, I don't have a 3D printer. I don't have a budget to buy a 3D printer. How can I print one? And they go through a whole bunch of different options. And it always wants to start to play for me. So let's say they're not going to be direct selectors, and a stylus isn't really going to help them out, and a key guard doesn't really make it work, and maybe you're considering switches. So that is absolutely within the realm of an OT's practice to look at what parts of their body do they have active use over, right? We have to watch out for fatigue, how much pressure they have to use to activate it. Not only to activate it, but to release or lift off of it. And the whole goal is that you're looking for something that's what I would call reliable and repeatable. So something that on a good day, on average, they're going to be able to get to and access their left thumb, and they can repeat that action with some control without amazingly large amounts of fatigue, right? So this is just an example of how I think through it. So this is a student who I did an evaluation with, and while I was there in the evaluation, I've used this picture all the time to kind of annotate, okay, he could do this, but he couldn't do that. Or he could do this, but it seemed like it was really weak or tiring for him. This is what he was able to do with his head. And even if you were to collect all this information and bring it back to the IEP team and say, you know what, I think I found 2 really good spots that he could utilize. That is just OT observation. That's not, I had some unique special training in assistive technology. That's just, I'm watching to see what flexible movement does he have under control over and what doesn't he. And I think it's incredibly important in terms of trying to find, for kids who have complex bodies, a good access method for AAC. So that's all about positioning, right? Now, when we're talking about actual interventions, what are we going to do with the student? What is OT and PT's role in that, right? So in the chat box, if you would, have you guys ever heard of communicative competencies? Is that a word that that rings a bell for you? All right. So you guys need to go have lunch with your SLP friends. And I'm going to give you lots of resources in this area, but that's really helpful to know. So it's not like presumes competence. So when we're looking at communicative competencies, these are the areas that we want, based on research, to make sure, and what we know good proficient communicators can do, right? So Janice Light, back a long time ago, kind of came up with some competencies, the 4 main competencies. And then over time, professionals that have worked in this area have kind of come up with some expanded competencies. And you can go read on NWACS's blog all about the expanded competencies. But in short, these are the expanded competencies. And we're going to talk through, when an SLP writes goals, they may very well write a goal as for social competency or a strategic competency. Do I expect you guys to be masters of competencies when you walk away from this hour? Absolutely not. I expect you to know enough to know, hey, you know what? Some of these areas might be areas that when I'm intervening and writing goals, I could include that as well. So we're going to talk through them a little bit. Linguistic competency is probably the one that we equate with SLP friends the most, right? It's that receptive and expressive language, being able to learn the code, the language of the AAC system. And that includes all of those language pieces, semantics, morphology, syntax, and all of the rules that we use when we build language, right? Being able to combine words to make something meaningful happen in a sentence, right? So when we're talking about linguistic competencies for an AAC user, we're talking about how well can they use the device to actually communicate, to tell us an expressive message, right? Operational competencies are incredibly important. It's great if they can put in their their sentence and say, I want to go home. But if that device is dead or the battery is dying and it needs to be charged and they can't tell you that they need to do that, they need a goal in the area of operational competence. And when we're talking about competency areas, we're really looking at the big picture goals. And it is really important that they have technical skills to be able to operate that system, right? And we know in the beginning, some of our AAC users need a lot of help and support to get there. Some of our AAC users could be doing some of these things more independently, but no one's really pushed them or helped support them to do it. Social competency is probably what you think it is, right? Knowing that I can communicate in a social situation, that I want to communicate and respond in a conversation or to a partner, and that I see myself as a communicator, right? So that competency takes a lot of like internal mind work to know I am a communicator and I can communicate something and get something back, right? So strategic competence is one about like, how do I repair when something's going wrong? If I can't find a word in my device, do I know? If I say something and it's interpreted wrong, can I very quickly go, no, 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 not what I meant? So that somebody knows, oh, don't act on that message, wait for the next message for clarification, right? And then emotional competence is probably the last one that kind of got added to this set of competencies partly because of the emergence of all the research about social emotional learning. And every piece of research about social emotional learning also applies to our kids who are AAC users, right? They need to know where those emotions are in their device. And when they're in PT and you're asking them to do something that's really hard for them physically, they can say, this is hard. I'm frustrated, right? They need to be able to have that emotional competency as well. And this last piece, which is 100% in OT and PT's wheelhouse, is to be able to self-advocate, to be able to say, I need something and I need you to pay attention to me that I need it. So my proposal or thought is that there's absolutely some places in these competencies, and I don't have all 6 of them on here on this graphic, but there are some places where we absolutely can have a role for our PTs linguistically, that they're able to control their devices or to tell somebody to control their mobility device. I want to go forward, I want to go backwards, or you know what, my leg really hurts in this position. Being able to interact during a movement game and say my turn and your turn, or I want to turn to catch the ball. And then strategically being able to use language to say, you know what, I need a different position because my butt really hurts. Like I need to be out of my chair. From an OT's perspective, it's being able to access that device, being able to self-advocate, like the strategic areas of competency, I think are some of the most important and B, kind of underutilized. And then from a psychosocial perspective, being able to interact in activity-based intervention, that's the meat of what we do, right? We plan an activity that's addressing a goal, and they need to be able to address, include themselves from a psychosocial perspective, be resilient when it's not going well, and keep going, okay? So we know those competencies are kind of like, if you want to translate competency to goal areas, right? So we want to integrate that into treatment, right? Co-treatment with an SLP is almost always a good option and a good idea. I know logistically it's probably not always possible, but I would encourage you, especially for kids who are AAC users, that you try to find an opportunity to either observe that speech session or to co-treat with them, because I think it's really, really important that we're seeing what an SLP is doing and an SLP is seeing what we're doing. And like I talked about comfort zones before, like a provider's lack of comfort doesn't equal an excuse not to use that AAC device during your treatment session. The best way to get comfortable with where words are and how to model language and how to use that device is to do it, right? Maybe it's as silly as we're doing some movement activities and we're going to read the foot book first, and we're going to model some language in our device, and we're going to find where the word foot is, and we're going to find where book is. Maybe it's doing a cars and moving activities. These are it's a product called Stuck on Stories. I've seen them many places. I think I got some at Aldi, which I think you guys have out there too. Like, they're basically suction cupped cars that stick in stories. Well, I use them in therapy to go stick them up on the window in the classroom, and then they have to go through and visually kind of find where they are based on descriptions. Again, I can model a ton of language that's communication while doing that, because they need to see us using their device or a paper version of it. They need to see us using it so that they can see the power of communication within a treatment activity as well. There are a ton of activity-based supports. Subtilo, which is an AAC vendor, makes this activity first, or choosing core first. I pulled the playground example because I know a lot of PTs that co-treat or treat on playgrounds, and look at all the language that you could be modeling or using on a paper AAC device or on their device while you're working on the playground. There's a ton. So this PDF has some of the examples, and then has a way to kind of break down what are the language I could do. What are some of the words that I could model and help this kid while I'm still working on my goals, right? It's not like you aren't doing the activity that's a slide or a swing or going up or going down or stopping. All those words you're going to use, you might as well put them to good use and be modeling language as well. This is another questionnaire that Lauren Enders and Emma Gowan put together based on information from Janice Light, who was the originator of the competencies. And it's just a good way to figure out what are all the words that are important for this kid, and how do we figure out where across the day we're going to help to utilize them. And like I gave you the example of the book, you know, a lot of people think, oh, well, literacy's for the teacher to conquer. Well, absolutely, OTs have a role in literacy, right? Our own people say it in our journals, right? It is because we are in early intervention in school settings, we need to be working on those reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills. And that correlates to literacy instruction and our students' uses of devices so that they grow in literacy and grow in communication at the same time. A couple of other intervention supports. So this is just core vocabulary books. If you know you want to target a certain word, it can bring up some books. This happens to be in Tar Heel Reader, but there are a ton of other options of ways that you can find books. All of these places are ways to find activities. If you're a PT and you work on go and stop or more or no or want, whatever word it is, there is an activity out there for you. So Core Workshop is really great. It's just a website where you can put in the word, and it will give you a picture that you could help model on, but it also gives you activities and books and ways and when to use it. Communication Workshop is by the folks who make Cough Drop, which is an AAC app. Other literacy activities, Tar Heel Reader is fantastic for writing books or finding books that are on lower levels of literacy, on emergent literacy level. And Tar Heel Gameplay is by the same people. If you're working with students who need to learn how to use switches, Tar Heel Gameplay is probably my favorite place to go with it. You'll see the very engaging but annoying baby shark video there. If it's a video that's on YouTube, you can incorporate it into Tar Heel Gameplay, and it automatically makes it a switch activity for that student, where it stops it after the time you set, and then it asks them to hit their switch again. So they're learning, I hit this button and I get this video. And you can change it so that it's pretty much any video that's on YouTube. That last category we'll spend a little less time on because I know sometimes people think, oh, environmental controls, like that's a home thing. We don't do that at school. And I just want to say, like, we absolutely could and should be doing some environmental control at school. Because for a lot of our students that have complex bodies, they have very little control over their universe, no matter what setting they're in. But that's true at school as well, right? So being able to put an environmental control unit, an ECU in place, is what it's basically a bridge between their ability and something they want to use. It could be a TV, it could be a light, it could be a different appliance, right? And so you want to try to make sure that it's something that's motivating to your kiddo, right? If they don't care about turning the lights on and off, then that's probably not the right ECU to put in place, right? We also want to make sure that as kids get approach transition, that we are putting in place good things to support their IADLs, right? Do they have a pet at home that they need to be able to give a treat to? Do they need to do shopping and meal prep? And how do we put in place things so that they could run a blender? So I think it's, again, thinking broadly about, when I walk into a second grade classroom and say, let's set up the entire classroom to be controlled by ECUs. No, but there's a time and a place. I have a student who was in a car accident and doesn't have great use of much of his body. So the things that he can do, we want him to do. His job is to turn the lights on and off, and it's through an environmental control unit. There are a lot of ways to do that. There's a power link, which basically is this device up here that you plug into the wall, and you plug the thing into it, and then you're able to use switches to turn things on and off. And then there's also this Relax, which is a remote of sorts. But again, think about all the words we could be modeling as language as we're teaching them self-advocacy skills and all these other things, on and off, more and stop, all the things that go with cooking and music and lights as well. And again, those have nothing to do with the device, but there are tons of things already built into devices. So if you have a student who has any AAC system, I would ask that question of the parent, of the vendor. What's possible for them to do with their device to help control their world, right? So this happens to be in Cough Drop, that they can control their TV. This happens to be in a PRC device. They can control the TV and the DVD player. You can program it to do your smart TV now, to turn the lights on and off. And again, this is using their device. But oh, darn it, if kids don't love to be able to turn the TV on and off or change the channels on TV. That's incredibly motivating and a reason that they're willing to practice and use their device. Again, PRC has a bunch of computer and TV control pages. Tobii Dynavox has simplified pages and more complex pages. You can also do it off device and have them use their device. If they use an iPad for their communication device, you can use Apple HomeKit at home. It's basically smart plugs, things, or smart devices, lights, those kinds of things that they could then control using their iPad. You can use a smart home hub. This is called a Harmony on the left-hand side, that allows you to run things on an app. If they're on their iPad for communication, they could also turn the lights on and off or turn the volume up and down. It's great when they can do it and their brother or sister don't know that they can do it, because then they start changing channels on them, and it's hilarious to watch the social interaction, right? So, and that's a typical thing to do, right? And kids love to turn the fan off and on people, to turn the lights on and off. So we can put smart plugs in. You can get a smart appliance. I have a kid who, they have one of those little robot vacuums, and one of his jobs every other day is to turn the remote on, the vacuum on, and tell it to go do its job. And he turns the lights off when they're getting ready to leave the house. So again, to me, those things can be incorporated in the school environment, and it opens a door to have conversation with the family of all this other, not only control they can have over the world, but language they can have, and that we can be modeling. So Alexa and Google Home are other places where we have seen kind of an explosion of our students. So this is an example of a student of mine.
Alexa, I want a.
Sorry,
I can't find the
Joke.
answer to the question I heard.
Alexa, I want a joke.
Why can you always find a pirate at disco night?
So he can ask him jokes. He can ask him what's on his to-do list. He can ask him to read him a book, right? The second video says so is much the same. This kiddo is using his eye gaze device and he is accessing via eye gaze. So he's got, and it's not very easy to see in this picture, but there's an eye gaze bar down here that he is accessing on his device. And he's an amazing kid. So he was interviewed on the radio and he has his own YouTube channel. He is in a high school magnet program of ours that is the Academy of Gaming and Mobile Apps, which I just think is cool that high schoolers could do that in high school. So he has a YouTube channel and he talks about playing games as an eye gaze user. So if you have another eye gaze user, have them go listen to Forrest's interview and listen to his YouTube channel, because I think we need to help support our users to think like there's so many cool things you could do. Yeah, your body may not, help you out a lot, but, he is an incredibly able-bodied, able-minded person despite his body kind of not helping him out. So there's a link down here from Luis Perez about using echoes kind of as accessibility. Again, another way to kind of harness the power of the technology that we do have to be able to help support. You can also talk about it. I want to make sure that we're not just, you can program pages to do Alexa, and I want to talk about it. I don't want them to just do it or watch TV. I want us to talk about it with them. So talking about TV is really important as well. I would encourage you to seek out partners, right? So one of the things I think OTs and PTs are really good at is sourcing resources, right? Whether that's community or otherwise. I work with high school robotics clubs. This is a picture of them coming in and making switch adapted toys for some of the kids in our campuses, right? They've started with a First with AT project. So you can go in. Again, it's a dual purpose project. My kids get some amazing stuff out of it, and these kids get some really amazing experience as high schoolers. There's a bunch of resources, again, about printing. You can 3D print some environmental control things that help kids to be able to open doors and close doors. A ton of resources out there. And again, I want to encourage you to know enough about what is within our scope of practice to say, hey, you know what, guys, have you ever thought about having the student's job be to turn the lights on and off or turn the fan on and off? Like, could we think about doing that on our campus? Just ask the questions enough so that you're working together as a team. I've provided some resources to help you step into your role. Like, I know the hesitancy is sometimes there from professionals I talk to, like, oh, I don't like AAC. That's I think the best way that we can do it is just to start to go in and see how we can support that student. Kim, in terms of class light switches, it depends. The newer the classroom, the easier it is sometimes to adapt it, but there are also ways to adapt some of the light switches so that they can be controlled by environmental control units. Absolutely. So here's a set of information about goals. Way more information than you want, but if you open up just this goals grid, okay, you'll see that it goes into a whole bunch of information about those competencies. So it gives you goals and ideas about, let's say we're working on a linguistic competency. Here are some ways you could do that. Let's say we want to talk about operational and I have OTs that write goals about operational competency for AAC. And they're not making them up off the top of their head. They're using some resources already out there to say, I'm going to try to figure out, here's a way that we can have them adjust their volume. The YouTube channel is linked in the slides. And the DAG, Julie, are you asking about the goals grid? It's linked right here in the slides. So again, being able to just know, hey, maybe I should start looking at where are some things I could take a small step. What are some things that I could start to implement into my goals? I've put a couple other resources about just how you might document AT. And I think that, you know, again, there are extra resources for you to have. I'm trying to think because I have time. This is a resource that Cough Drop designed about ways that we can support our AAC communicators. So their original is up here. They made a big book and then a little flip book. And I kind of noticed they had left some people out, namely OTs and PTs. So I adapted that book for them. And I added in more information about ways that OTs and PTs can support AAC users as a part of their AAC in the Cloud conference they do every year. And so you'll find that updated link here. I called it the expanded one. And so it has all of those other people, OTs and PTs, included in a way that kind of helps, again, bring this back to the team and say, you know what, like this crazy person talked about the fact that we could help support OT AAC. Here's some ideas on how we could do that. And the rest of the things that are in this presentation are just resources. It's a Google Doc I use to collaborate with the whole team. It's how I plan who helps to do what in terms of related services, books that I use, and planning guides that kind of talk about AAC, and we find the spaces where OTs and PTs absolutely have that role. And just imparting, these are the ones I could fit on a slide about ways that we can do this, right? You have all these ideas. I'm not going to read them to you, but think about ways that we can incorporate language and modeling that language on their AAC device. They need to be able to use it when they come to OT, when you're doing, you know, stereognosis, you're having them reach in a bag and pull out the what and the who and have them describe it using their device. You know, use a parachute, do stop and go. I love doing obstacle courses because it gives us a ton of language that we can model and utilize. And everything that I've talked about link wise, and I'll go back and double check to see if I put his YouTube channel in there, is in this Wakelet. So if I said something and I didn't get it in there, I will go back and listen to the recording and make sure that I get it in the Wakelet. But this is all those links and more, and you have the slides of information. There isn't really time for questions. You can always email me or reach out on Twitter. I'm more than happy to entertain the conversation that way. And again, this is the link to the slides at the bottom, and I will let Bridget talk about the evaluation, which is on the side with the QR code while I take some water.
Well, and before I do that, I really just want to extend my gratitude to Alyssa. I really think that you have empowered many practitioners here today just to think of new and different ways to be involved in AAC. And I especially appreciate your encouragement to get out of our comfort zone and to really build our knowledge and our competency and to collaborate with others along the way. So thank you again so much. We truly appreciate it. And I see Patty has dropped in the evaluation link. So go ahead and make sure that you complete that evaluation. This is also important. Obviously, we want to give our great feedback to Alyssa, but also important for you to get your CEU credits.
That
So
almost might be more important than giving me feedback. Trust me, I'm an OT who has licenses in 2 states. I understand CEUs are mission critical sometimes. And again, you know, if you have a question, you can drop it in the chat box. I understand it's almost 8 o'clock East Coast time. So if your brain is full, but something comes to you, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or by email, and I'm happy to help. Again, I think it's a conversation that's really important to have because our AAC users deserve it. And honestly, you guys deserve the opportunity as OTPs and PT professionals to engage with our AAC users because I'm not supposed to have favorite kids, but they're some of my favorites. Can't believe we made it to 8 o'clock.